Thanks so much. Professor Alford, I want to start with you. As you recall, the Department of Justice and state attorneys general sued Google over its alleged abuse of monopoly power in the advertising technology market. There are those who look at that and say that shows that our current antitrust laws are sufficient and no need to adjust anything based on modern technologies and how modern technologies might be being abused because this action has been brought. So I was wondering if you could discuss how reform measures like the America Act could address competition in, for example, the advertising technology market as part of the solution, in addition to the pending litigation.
So, as a conservative, I know you have the same viewpoint. Generally, we prefer litigation over regulation, but there are instances in which litigation is simply not sufficient. And this is one of those areas where the litigation against Google is focused on a very, very narrow category of misconduct by Google in a very specific market. And yet Google is a monopoly, as Senator Hawley has said, in multiple different markets.
Did you just say that because you walked in? That was pretty impressive.
Thank you. I just pivoted there, yeah.
He had that in his remarks already.
Exactly. Take YouTube, for example. There's nothing in the case at all about YouTube, probably because the market definition is unclear and getting over the 60% threshold that you would need is difficult, and therefore both the DOJ and the 17 state AGs didn't even include YouTube in the discussion. And yet your legislation would directly address the same exact conduct in the video advertising market. I also would credit you for the legislation for a whole other reason, which is in the event that the DOJ is successful in the coming weeks in the ad tech case, which I hopeful that they will use your legislation as a model for the kinds of remedies that may be appropriate. So it actually signals what should be happening with respect to remedies.
Great. Now, drawing on your expertise, your time serving as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in DOJ Antitrust, how, in your opinion, would the One Agency Act eliminate inefficiency and enhance our antitrust enforcement efforts in this country?
So as I said in my written testimony, the major concern from my perspective about having dual agencies is we know it can be done successfully because that's the way it's done in every other country in the world. We're really the only major competition authority that has two agencies. So we know it can be done, right, with one agency. The biggest inefficiencies, I think, as I said in my testimony in writing, is the clearance and conflict issues that come up. They come up in very small ways on specific merger reviews and the discussions often during the 30-day window that you have for second requests. Often several of those days, numerous days, are just about clearance before you actually review it on the merits. But more importantly are the big macro questions, like who should take leadership over artificial intelligence? Both, even though the relationship between Lina Khan and Jonathan Kanter is wonderful, they both strongly wanted to take leadership on artificial intelligence, and they've had many, many conversations about that. In the Trump administration, we had months and months of discussions about big tech and who's going to lead at the FTC side. So that takes a lot of effort to try to just resolve those sorts of issues on the macro level.
Especially given that in many markets, especially many of the newer markets, it doesn't fit neatly into things that one agency or the other has followed. It's sort of neither man nor horse, but like the centaur, pieces of both.
Like vertical mergers, Amazon purchasing Whole Foods, I mean, you have different agencies traditionally doing different things. It seems odd that you would have one agency taking beer and another taking hard liquor. I mean, there's a lot of oddities that happen with the clearance arrangement.
Right. Usually you don't see that outside of a state alcoholic beverage commission.
Well, we did have a good hearing on beer.
Yeah,
beer
that's true. That's true.
Yeah, okay.
She wanted to have samples.
Okay, said no. What?
And I would have been fine with the samples, just, unless they had the non-alcoholic stuff, I wouldn't. I assume the real thing must taste a lot better than the non-alcoholic stuff because that's not very tasty. Professor Newman, you touched on zero-price markets in your opening testimony. How do you think? What do you think is the best way to contextualize zero-price markets and how to understand them in the context of the consumer welfare standard? There are those who would take that to its logical conclusion and take Bork's words decades ago and say that that means the consumer welfare standard has just would leave zero price markets alone. Tell me your view.
So I think that a lot of the harms that we see from a lack of competition in zero price markets actually are surprisingly very analogous to the more familiar types of monopoly overcharges we've long seen in positive price markets. It just requires us to really wrap our minds around the fact that even though there's no price tag attached, we are paying for these things, right? We quite literally pay attention when we use these things. We pay attention to ads. We pay by surrendering our privacy. And if a monopolist doesn't face enough competition to keep our costs low, our attention costs or our privacy costs low, then you're going to see a monopoly overcharge, just like you would with a positive price market.
So in that respect, the consumer welfare standard applies on all fours within zero price markets. If there is no overt price with a price tag that you can see, you are the product, to phrase it differently, you are paying, you're just paying in a different form, paying with your time, your eyeballs, your mouse clicks, your data. And that too can and does, it's fairly easy, in fact, to translate to a dollar value. And so you would agree then that that does have a price, and because it has a price, it's not accurate to say that zero price markets are somehow existing outside of the universe of the consumer welfare standard.
I think that's exactly right. And I would go maybe even a step further and say, we're used to thinking of money as being a very valuable thing, but what's more valuable than time, our attention, our privacy, our information about ourselves? So yeah, these are familiar harms in a sense, but they're really serious ones.
Right. Perhaps law professors who sometimes practice in antitrust should be able to calculate their billable hour rate into that, but we'll leave that for another hearing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. Senator Blumenthal.